Good afternoon, good morning to all of you. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this session here as part of our Unipify Regional Roundtable for Europe. My name is Remco Fischer. I am the climate change lead at Unipify. I'll be moderating this fantastic panel that we've put together on really one of the critical sustainability agendas of the moment. Which is what are the roles and what are the tools that the finance sector has in playing its part in decarbonizing the economy and in reaching net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and ultimately us all being able to limit the mean global temperature increase to 1.5 in the course of this century. We'll discuss the roles and the tools that the finance sector has. That's one part of the equation. But also, of course, we need to look at the challenges that the sector faces in playing this role. What are the limitations at hand? What does the sector need from within? But perhaps more importantly, what does the sector need from other parts of the economy, from other parts of society, from government, etc.? And how does the sector get going now in light of what we're seeing in terms of commitments? As many of you will know, Unipify, together with our partners, we've organized this net zero work through coalitions of the willing, coalitions of net zero leaders. And we have one alliance basically covering each of the various financial industries or sub-industries that typically as Unipify we work with. So for instance, for the institutional investment community, with PRI, Unipify facilitates the UN-convened Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance. On the banking side, Unipify facilitates the Net Zero Banking Alliance, and on the insurance side, through the Principles for Sustainable Insurance, Unipify also facilitates the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. And through these alliances, what they all have in common is, of course, financial institutions are committing to transitioning their portfolios not only to net zero emissions by 2050, but also into alignment with the 1.5 temperature outcome that we have as an objective. We have a great, very distinguished panel today, consisting of three leaders from the finance sector, each representing not only one of the industries I've mentioned, banking, investment, insurance, each also representing each of the three net zero alliances that I've mentioned. And not only that, our panelists today are correspondingly the chairs for each of these net zero alliances, meaning on net zero finance, probably there could not be a better panel than this one. So we're very lucky to have with us today Tracy McDermott, who's the group head of conduct, financial crime and compliance at Standard Chartered Bank and chair of the Net Zero Banking Alliance. We have Renaud Guidet, the group chief risk officer at AXA and chair of the Net Zero Insurance Alliance. And we have Günther Thallinger, member of the board of management at Allianz, responsible for investments and ESG and chair of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance. Before I turn to our distinguished panelists, I wanted to reflect a little on what from our perspective at Unipify is so novel and so groundbreaking and promising about these net zero commitments that we're seeing come out from the finance sector through these alliances. And we believe there are really five characteristics, five key features of these commitments that make them so groundbreaking. Let me quickly take you through these five key features. One, commitments are in nature systemic. Financial portfolios very often reflect the full economies of the countries or even of the world that they're exposed to. This means that at the moment, they're not backing 1.5. They're not at the moment in line with 1.5. They cannot be because the overall system isn't. But the commitment that financial institutions are making is that they now will lead thoroughly, support, and be at the core of the wider systemic change that is needed. Second, commitments are comprehensive. Aligning with the Paris Agreement requires financial institutions to view their portfolios and holdings very holistically, managing the carbon footprint of portfolios across sector exposures, across geographic exposures, and across asset class or asset type exposures. Three, commitments are science-based and time-bound. Aligning portfolios does not happen in an aleatory way. It needs to happen based on and informed by the most authoritative science and the scenarios that are laid out by, among other efforts, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Those scenarios are time-bound. They tell us what needs to happen with emissions exactly by when, and so must be and so will be the transition of financial portfolios under these commitments. Number four, commitments are measurable and transparent. They're quantitative, and part of the commitment is that financial institutions over time, methodically and periodically report on progress. This reporting, of course, is particularly important in a world that, as we're seeing now, is increasingly skeptical of greenwashing happening. Five, the actions implied in the commitments are immediate. Intermediary targets that are being set for attainment are due as soon as 2025, in some cases, and at latest 2030. That's 4 to 8 years from now. And that means that financial institutions need to obviously take concrete action now to be able to achieve those intermediary targets. There you have it. I think that's at the level of commitment that we have at the moment. This is what makes it so groundbreaking. It is the culmination, I think, of 3 decades of work on sustainable finance focused on climate change. Of course, now the challenge for all of us, especially for the leading financial institutions, is turning commitments into actions. And my duty is now to turn to our panelists. So let me start with, I think, a question or a few interrelated questions to all 3 of you. We've seen the number of non-state actors committing to net zero is through the roof at the moment. We have 60 asset owners in the Asset Owner Alliance with 10 trillion in assets. We have over 90 banks now in the net zero banking lines with over 60 trillion in assets. In GFANZ, which is the alliance of alliances, there's now, I think, 400 institutions with 130 trillion in assets, seemingly. Those are big numbers. So these 3 questions to US panelists. Why do you think so much momentum? Why do we have so much momentum on this at the moment? Why do you think it's important that financial institutions are part of this momentum alongside other stakeholders? And why do you think it's important that financial institutions act through alliances? What's the point and the benefits of alliances? That's my first set of questions to all of you. Perhaps I could turn first to Tracy, for some views on these questions. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you, Remco, and thank you everybody for the invitation today. So if I start with the question of why is there so much momentum, there's a part of this which, let's be honest, is opportunistic, because we have COP26, we have the eyes of the world on every player in the segment, not just financial sector institutions, but on the whole economy and on governments. And that has been a real catalyst for people stepping up to the plate and saying, actually, we need to do something about this. But beyond that, I think what it also reflects, the momentum, is a real focus and realization within financial institutions and within broader society that we really do have to act now, and that this problem is not going to be solved for us by other people's actions. So we do need governments, we do need policymakers, but we also need to step up and play our part. And I think we are all hearing from our own employees, from our own clients, our own investors, our own regulators, that this is a matter that's important. And so I think you mentioned, Remco, that this was building on 30 years of sustainability, and I think that's right. But I think it's kind of come to a head at this stage as we, the combination of a realization of the urgency and also the fact that we need to be part of the solution. I think in terms of why it's important that FIs step up to the plate, or financial institutions step up to the plate, is you mentioned again that this has got to be a change that impacts the whole economy. The real economy has got to change but financial institutions play a significant part in supporting the real economy, both in terms of what they do today and importantly in terms of what they need to do tomorrow and how they are going to get there. And I think certainly speaking from a sort of banking perspective, that question of transition and how we move from the current position to where we need to get to is a really critical part, and finance has a really important role to play there as part of an overall framework. And I think the reason alliances are really important, well, if we look at the kind of headline alliance, the overall alliance, bringing together all aspects of the financial sector is really important, because there are different roles for banks, insurers, asset owners to play, but they are interrelated. Within the sub-alliances, I think the things that are really important there are, first of all, we are all learning here. We haven't all done this for tens of years, and therefore we've got a playbook that we just pull out of the drawer and use. So we need to share experience, we need to share learnings, we need to work out how we do this in a way which is consistent, transparent, and comparable across institutions. And that is a really important part of the alliances. The other really important part of the alliance, I think, is giving us a collective voice, so that we can talk to stakeholders, whether those be policymakers, whether those be NGOs, whether those be client segments, to say, look, these are the challenges we face, and this is how we can propose to address them, and this is the support we need. And bringing together the sort of scale and weight, and you mentioned, the NZBA has now got 95 banks across 39 countries, with 40% of global banking assets. That's a big voice to actually have, and to be able to be part of that debate and part of the discussion about how do we all drive this forward. So those are my thoughts on your question.
Thanks very much, Tracy. Over to the other panelists, if you may add with your views, perhaps Günther first, and then Renaud. I appreciate it gets more difficult because it's the same question to all of you, and it's difficult to be repetitive. But just whatever you have to convey, please feel free to do.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, really thank you for your very, very kind introduction in terms of, let's say, mentioning that we are the three chairs of the UN convened alliances. It is very important, of course, that I must say we can be the chair because there is UNEP-FI actually convening and bringing us together and keeping, let's say, a momentum, and also, let's say, being ready to provide what is called a little bit in a almost denigrating way secretariat, but actually which is the hardcore of these alliances. So not to your question, but nevertheless very important context, UNEP-FI is clearly, let's say, in the driver's seat here for many, many elements. To your question, and not trying to repeat now what Tracy really very, very eloquently pointed out, and therefore, in a very short form, I do believe by now it has rippled through that this form of economy is breaching the ecological ceiling in various forms. And the climate impact is a very, very obvious one. And we really need to tackle it now. That's what, exactly as Tracy said, what customers tell us, what regulators tell us, what many others tell us, but what also, of course, young generations tell us, perhaps even from the streets. So ecological ceiling is breached in various forms. The economy needs to transform. The very, very bad thing with this is while we do breach the ecological ceiling, we still do not achieve a societal minimum for many, many on this globe. So both the ecological ceiling and the societal minimum, where actually the economy needs to live in between, need to be really considered. It has rippled through by now. We do know that this is of utmost importance. At least there is absolutely nobody in the financial industry who can say, I have never heard the message. And for that reason, of course, people take it up. Now, with this, the question comes immediately, okay, what does taking up mean? And taking up mean to us here in these alliances really means we need to provide to ourselves targets, very short-term interim targets, not only 2050 net zero. No, really changing in this, the decisive decade. And that's what we do. And that's what we do. We start with changing ourselves to then be able to really reach out to all our partners in the economy. And I think this is also what generates lots of momentum. It shows to those who are not already members that it may actually make a lot of sense to come in and join us, because we are really in a certain form trying to work on a transformation of this form of financial industry as we know it. And if I want to go really a little bit farther, it is not only the financial industry. We actually, by changing the decision making, we really work on a form of making capitalism more sustainable. That's what we do. And this alone generates, I hope, and I believe I can see, lots of momentum.
Thanks so much, Günther. I think the point of your last point around this being a manifestation of making capitalism more sustainable is something that resonates very well with us at UNEP-FI. I think this is, what we, have seen be our role really, over the last 20 years or so, or 30 years even, that we've existed, internalizing all of these factors that are outside into the core decision making, so that capitalism can also apply its magic on those problems that so far have been kind of left outside. Thank you, Renaud. Even more difficult to use the third one to come in at this point, but the sky's the limit.
Yeah, as you put it, the sky is the limit, and we like to raise the bar for insurers, Remco. So very happy to be up to the challenge. First and foremost, let me thank you and the whole UNEP-FI team for hosting this event, and thanking our audience as well for joining. Good evening, good afternoon, and good morning to all of you. I hope this finds you well. Your remark, Remco, was indeed about the financial services industry, walking the talk and getting its act together, and I think that's great, and we are seeing that momentum. And given the breadth of our financial firepower, given the comprehensiveness of the services we provide to our customers, indeed, we have a lot of leverage, and we can do a lot to support and enable the transition. However, I would like to make sure that we get the narrative straight, because coming back from Glasgow, where I was last week for the COP26, I've heard a lot that governments were sort of having the limelight and really leading the show in Paris 5 years ago for the COP21, and now it was a turn to the financial services industry to take over. I don't think that's the right approach, and I think it's very important that we can align the stars, and the financial services industry is not stepping in to make up for any shortfall of action from governments. Rather, we want to complement it. And I would say, as I had the opportunity to mention it in Glasgow last week, it takes two to tango, between the governments, the policymakers on the one end, and the financial services industry, banks, asset owners and managers, insurers and reinsurers on the other end. And it actually even takes three to party. What is very important is we should not forget the underlying economy, our customers, and make sure that they are involved and they do actually transform and make greener their manufacturing processes, their logistics processes, their service provision processes, because ultimately our portfolios, be it in underwriting, in credit, in investment, will only be a reflection of the underlying economy. So there's only so much we can do if we are not supported, by that third constituency beyond governments and policymakers, beyond the financial services industry, which is in every other sector, the corporates, and beyond them, the households as well. So it's really a holistic effort that we have to drive, and I rely on that, and I expect a lot of that going forward. I think that the fact that the tide is turning and we see a lot of momentum and people aligning this year is indeed good, because it's been brought by the COP26 momentum. I think that we've been helped by the fact that there were many conclusions. If I look at the International Energy Agency report earlier this year, the latest version of the IPCC report as well, that now climate change is unequivocally a byproduct of human influence. So I think that we've reached a great level of consensus in terms of awareness and acknowledgement. But now we should be beyond awareness. We should be beyond acknowledgement. We should be into decision and action. So, just lamenting about the state of our current world and the trajectory, the gliding trajectory on which it is, won't be enough. So we need to really roll up our sleeves and take decisive actions. And I think this is why, the three alliances that are represented today really stand out, which is that we not only coalesce, we not only gather under one roof many players of the same industry, we always also set very ambitious targets, very credible processes to monitor the progress against these targets, and we will be accountable to that. So I think this is why, for instance, speaking for the Net Zero Insurance Alliance, and I know it's the same for others, we've been, accredited by the Race to Zero expert peer review group, and that matters a lot to us because it means we are the go-to institutions in each of our respective spaces, and this is where it happens, and we will actually transform the trajectory and make the planet greener.
Thanks very much, Renaud. I think you mentioned that, what are the ingredients for success here? And I would want to echo what you said, because this is something that we've been thinking about quite a bit, of course. And I do agree there are 4 ingredients or 4 stakeholder groups that need to be part of the recipe. And one is the finance, the financial services, or the financial economy, if you wish. The other one is the real economy, which is, the recipients of capital, or the recipients of financial services. Then we have policy regulation, which will be sector specific at times, but then at other times economy wide. And then we have the 4th element that I still, as UNEP, will want to always stress: the science. The science it's the 4th point of reference, and we need to be maneuvering all of those 4 points so that pathways become clear, and pathways, from a scientific perspective, but pathways also become implementable and feasible. You mentioned COP. COP is happening just now as we speak. It's happening after, 3 years. I think Allianz, 3 years ago, really kicked off the incubation a little bit of the Asset Owner Alliance that is now the oldest alliance that we have. Progress has been phenomenal. Only 3 weeks ago, Günther, as you know, the Asset Owner, as you mentioned, the Asset Owner Alliance published its intermediary targets. It's something that we haven't seen before. Intermediary targets by 2025 being put on the table. I mean, that's just a paradigm shift. And now we have COP, and COP is meant to be the net zero finance COP. Is it? What's your observations from COP, Günther? You were there last week, of course, like all of us. Is COP delivering what the AOA needs, what the net zero finance community need at the moment?
Yeah, veterans to COP. I'm not a veteran to COP. I had the pleasure to be at 3 of them. But veterans to COP tell me that this is the COP where the private sector is present like never before. It goes very much into the direction of what Renaud mentioned. Here are lots of ambitions that are really put forward. And in that sense, COP is already a success, I must say. Let's say having the private sector with this, let's say, wide range of truly ambitious commitments and targets. And the financial sector, certainly with a key role, is very important to have the follow-up after COP set up in an appropriate form. And the follow-up that is now possible is that, let's say, governments can work with the private sector, can take the financial, let's say, industry with the various building blocks that are now offered in the form of these commitments, in the form of the ambition levels, and really start to have discussions about transformation plans, ideally almost country by country transformation plans. This is now in reach. What we have heard, for instance, from, let's say, from the UK government, 2023, every company with a transformation plan. This goes very much exactly in that direction, because if you have every company with a transformation plan, a government can look into this and can start to see what do those transformation plans actually require to come into existence. So governments can start to understand what is actually the, let's say, the energy volume and mix by 2025 and at a later stage. And with this, we can really start to talk what transformation on infrastructure side, or let's say a little bit more precise on networks like electricity, like transport, are now relevant and need to be, let's say, really discussed and defined now, so that the financial industry can come in as really a supporter of these developments. And I believe this is in itself already a success. Now, I do understand with COP, with this COP, we clearly have to talk about, are we going to keep 1.5 degrees alive? Well, I mean, we here, the alliances represented, I would say we do not only discuss, do we want to keep it alive? We clearly work on to 1.5 degrees, let's say, and we clearly state science-based, low, no overshoot in the Asset Owner Alliance. So this is not a discussion for us, but it's one thing clearly here that others have taken this up. They want to keep it alive. And from, let's say, the very first informations that we get after India, let's say with the pledge, after South Africa, it seems that we go very much in the direction below the 2 degrees. So overall, I'm very, very optimistic with this COP.
Thank you. And I am not a COP veteran. I'm a COP dinosaur, and I can fully agree with you. I have never seen at any COP this level of not only presence, by the private sector, by the finance sector, but engagement and tabling of concrete commitments, concrete targets. That is absolutely a new thing. I think what is needed, we do see these commitments from countries, net zero, long-term commitments. Of course, as with the commitments from the finance sector, the private sector, the devil will be in the detail of, okay, where are you going to be in next 5 years, in the 7, 8 next years? This is at the moment lacking, from the government, the long-term government net zero commitments that we see. The shorter term plans around NDCs do not add up to well below 2 or well below 2 at the moment. It would seem to me that the world needs also a net zero alliance of countries that applies the same standard. Not all countries necessarily, but at least those that have made net zero commitments, and within which countries apply onto themselves the same scrutiny and the same discipline that we see the financial institutions in your alliances, putting upon themselves in terms of metrics and etc. Another question for you, Günther. Again, AUA pioneering away at the moment. Again, because it is the pioneer in this space, really, having been formed 2 years ago. 29 members have set targets for 2025. Those have been documented and published in the recent progress report. The next progress report will be in a year, 2 years from now. What would you like to see in it? In the next big AUA progress report, what would be your preferred headline?
Yeah, well, 2 things. I mean, all of us have, let's say, a 5-year target out. That's the first thing. This will be difficult because those who are going to join us, for them it's a little bit short. So this is a very high ambition. But I would say almost all should have, let's say, a 5-year target out, because this has this implication on how our decision making changes. And then, yes, of course, that we can come back to the let's say to UNEP, the Secretariat, and can start to report how we are going to meet these, let's say, commitments, and it can be shown that we are on the path. It's not only that we have some targets out there, but we really work towards these targets. This will give lots of credibility that we cannot have today, because today we have, if I may say, we have pledges, but we have not shown that we really can achieve it. I'm very confident that we are able to achieve it, but in 1 year time, next progress report, I believe we can even document it.
Thank you. Thanks, Günther. Let me turn to you, Tracy. The NZBA, the Net Zero Banking Alliance, of course, only 6 months old. It's unbelievable, but it's only been 6 months, and it's grown to 40% of global banking assets, as you said. What's the next thing for the alliance? What's the next thing for Net Zero banks individually, but what's the next big thing for the alliance overall, from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think there's been an extraordinary growth in the Net Zero Banking Alliance since we set up in April with 43 members, and we're now up to 95 members. And I think this reflects the momentum that we talked about earlier, which is, you know, if you compare that to the commitment on climate action that, you know, we and some others signed up to in 2019, which didn't really get that sort of weight behind it. And by signing up, people have made those very real commitments that you talked about in your introduction to a pathway to net zero by 2050, to targets published within 18 months of joining for 2030, and to annual reporting and transparency. So people have made big steps, and those are CEO level commitments that people have signed up to very publicly. So really the focus in 2022 is now on actually how do we go towards execution of those commitments. And we all recognize that the pace is critical here. We need to develop our own plans as financial institutions, as banks, to transition. But really importantly, we need to engage with clients on actually what they need to do to transition. And this was touched on by Günther earlier as well, and by Renaud. You know, we need the kind of real economy to come with us. And there's a real role for banks and the NZBA to play in that pace. So, you know, we know that our members are at different stages of their evolution. Some of them are, you know, publishing or have published their own net zero plans. Standard Chartered, we published ours just a couple of weeks ago. Others are joining NZBA because they want help to understand how to do this and how to get that. So I think what we want to do from an NZBA perspective is really draw on the breadth and diversity of membership that we've got across geographies, across sectors, across different sort of banking business models, help develop tools that can help people really think about how do you operationalize a net zero strategy, and how do you engage with clients, and as I said, with policymakers in terms of that. So the focus is very much from, you know, we've got the commitments, we've got the headlines, COP will be over. We've now got to actually deliver and start reporting on that through people's TCFD reporting and others. And we've got to continue to put the momentum in terms of sharing information, developing tools, and engaging with policymakers, with clients, to say, actually, let's make sure we have a framework that enables us to deliver what we need to deliver.
Thank you, Tracy. And Renaud, what does this look like, you know, from the NZIA perspective? You know, what are the priorities, the big next steps there, you know, post-COP, post-launch, for individual members, but also for the alliance as a collective?
So I would outline several key steps. The first one is to further build on the credibility that is part of our DNA, and, you know, keep that track record and that momentum. And that credibility, you know, comes through transparency. I mentioned earlier the targets, so let me delve into more detail. What we are doing right now is we are working on building a target setting protocol that will be ready within 14 months time, by January 2023. Then each NZIA member will be releasing intermediate targets with a 5-year cadence, and we'll also be reporting on a yearly basis on progress against these targets. So it means that we are really accountable for what we will have committed to, and that matters a lot, because to me it's very important that, you know, beyond the initial headlines, there's a lot of follow-up, and it really grinds through our organizations and the impact. And I think that credibility also comes with a reference to the science. And you mentioned earlier the importance of science as a fourth pillar, Remco. And just to give an example, you know, which is AXA specific, you may have seen that a couple of weeks ago we just disclosed our new policy regarding oil and gas, and that going forward we will neither invest in nor underwrite any new oil greenfield exploration project unless it is actually carried out by a transition leader. So that is obviously a nod to the International Energy Agency report released earlier this year. So we want, to stick to the latest scientific evidence and to really take that into account. And that's also a sign of our commitment to transition. And this is the second highlight I wanted to focus on. Transition really matters because we are not exclusion machines. I think that exclusion is a measure of last resort, and many of our organizations have actually used that tool for hopeless causes, in industries which are so carbon heavy that actually there's no credible path forward. When you have clients who actually really find it too difficult to turn the tide, then exclusion can be a measure of last resort. But it's very important, if we want to help transform the bulk of the economy, that we get in the tent with our client to help transform them and transition them from the inside. It's probably a bit less dramatic. It's more, nitty-gritty work day to day, but it's very important, and it's how we can have impact both on the asset side as an asset owner and an asset manager. So as I say often, we can be more impactful by voting in AGMs rather than voting with our feet. And the same goes for the underwriting side, working with our insurance and reinsurance clients, really as a sparring partner to help them become greener. And that topic of transition, is very important. And this is why under the umbrella of the GFANS, AXA is actually working, together with NatWest and the London Stock Exchange Group on the real economy transition plan workstream. We have a focus on 3 sectors as a pilot, namely oil and gas, aviation, and the steel industry, all of which are obviously seen as being overweight contributors to climate change, and also sectors where we can learn a lot from the early steps taken to gauge actually the impact of each corporate on global warming. And so from that, we can probably replicate and extrapolate a broader set of metrics that will be used for the broader economy.
Thank you, Rino. I mean, you're touching there on a very, very important and central question, which is that of impact. How do we make sure? How does the finance sector make sure that as it transitions its portfolios to net zero, that happens in lockstep with transitioning also the real economy towards net zero and reducing emissions? And I think there's a little interplay there between engaging and then also reallocating capital, even walking away in certain cases from portfolio companies, etc. And most people at this point agree that for most cases, for most companies in most sectors, engagement needs to be the priority, because that will lead to impacts fastest. But with capital reallocation being a little bit the measure of last resort. I don't know if Günther or Tracy, you would want to also weigh in on this question of how best can financial institutions use these very different tools that they have to achieve their targets, but also in a way that decarbonizes the real economy. Would you have any additional views on this point?
So I can sort of jump in. So I agree with the point that this is absolutely critical, and I think simply walking away from sectors is an easy way for financial institutions to make themselves feel good, that they've got a portfolio that looks better, but it actually does nothing to help the real economy transition, which is what we ultimately need. I think what I would add is just to say that there has to be a recognition that that transition pathway, even though it's all science-based, actually looks different in different countries and different regions, which depends partly on where they are, particularly in energy, in terms of their current energy generation. It also depends a lot on their social and economic development. And if you look at the places where we're expecting to see economic growth, in social improvement in people's living standards, historically that has always gone hand in hand with increases in emissions. We cannot see the same level of increases in emissions as we've seen in the past. We can't afford that, but we do have to recognize that there will be areas and markets. There's still 800 million people in sub-Saharan Africa without access to reliable power. as those people get access to reliable power, which I think should be an aspiration we all share, then that will increase emissions. Now, there may be opportunities to leapfrog some of that in terms of going straight to cleaner energies. That requires financial institutions to play their part, but it will also require risk sharing, it will require policy change, it will require a whole of system response to achieve that. But there will also be areas where a phase out, whether it be oil and gas working with climate leaders, whether it be phasing out coal in some of the economies where Standard Chartered has footprint markets, that's not going to happen overnight. And I think that's one of the hard truths we have to be prepared to talk about transparently and openly, backed by science, to show that we are not just walking away from the problem and we're not just hiding behind a smokescreen of transition, but that actually transition is critical if we're to achieve both net zero and appropriate economic and social development for the globe.
Thank you, Tracy. Was there anything else from your side, Günther, on this whole complex area?
Yeah, well, on engagement, absolutely true. For the time being, that's absolutely the best way to develop, let's say, assets, if I may, let's say, use the asset owners language. It is absolutely the best way today, but it is let me say, a fairly inefficient way, and it's absolutely not a scalable way. Many of us have in their portfolios, let's say, something like 5,000 assets, perhaps 7,000 or even 10,000 assets. That shows that reaching out to those is simply, by the numbers, very difficult if you want to reach everybody. Now, immediately the argument comes though, you just need to reach out to the, let's say, heavy emitters. Absolutely, that's why we have to support, and we are supporting actually all members of the Asset Owner Alliance, the Climate Action 100 Plus, no doubt, must really be done. In the future, and hopefully in the near future, we come, however, to a form of reporting, quality assured, that really helps to speed up this engagement. And in a hopefully not too far out future, we have a form of reporting that makes most of what we call engagement today obsolete. This is what we need to achieve. We need to go with, let's say, with climate topics, with climate impact, with the management of, let's say, the reduction of the climate impact onto a level that we know today from, let's say, the financial markets. It must be highly efficient, and therefore standardized reporting needs to come in, let's say, as quickly as possible. Last point to this, the standardized reporting should clearly be done on a corporate level. That's exactly what we discussed. So ISSB, ESAP, and all these, let's say, initiatives, open source climate, let's say, really working on the data provision. We, however, also need to talk about the information provided to consumers, because both need to be informed. The investors, the financial partners, so especially, of course, insurers and banks, they need to be informed, but also the consumer needs to inform. So standardized reporting at the product level is almost equally important. And we need to bring this into this discussion. And then engagement will, although it is the best today, it will, let's say, to be reduced because we have something better.
I just want to connect the dots a little bit there. Like, I think a lot of the sustainability or climate reporting disclosure we've seen from corporates, is so far not being really aligned with the net zero challenge, right? It's been very aligned with other sustainability related topics, more transition risk or risk metrics rather than just the sheer transition. And I think this is where we need to get to, that disclosure frameworks really are fit for purpose for the net zero transition. I want to connect that to one of the points, I think, Tracy, that you said at the beginning, which is one voice. How can now net zero financial institutions or financial institutions committed to net zero with one voice across banks, insurance, asset managers, asset owners, and others request and push for those disclosure mechanisms to be put in place? As AOA, I think what we did about a year ago was, for instance, weigh in on the consultation of in Europe of the disclosure directive for extra financial reporting, making these exact points and saying this is the information we need. And hopefully, of course, going forward, it's not only the asset owners, but it's everyone asking for the same disclosure metrics and the same disclosure data points that are needed to make the system more effective and more efficient, Günther, as you say. I have one other question. I think, for you, Günther, because you've been involved in these alliances, in the longest, but equally Tracy and Renaud, you can come in. The alliances at the moment are fairly similar. They're obviously all net zero, intermediary targets, etc. But at the same time, they're not identical. Do you think there are any very key areas where they need to be identical, where there needs to be more convergence, between the various alliances on specific questions, so that the overall agenda remains credible and is able to deliver? I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, Günther, or anyone else. Where do we need more convergence on net zero alliances?
Well, I would say there is certainly, let's say, if it is convergence, I don't know, but in terms of an understanding what we really need to achieve in terms of sector science-based pathways, we fully share this. So there the work is clearly very much aligned. I do believe the convergence that we are going to see is how we work with, let's say, the various, let's say, clients and partners that we have. Very much to what Renaud was already, let's say, illustrating. Sector pathway work. With the sector pathways, then really reaching out to companies and see how their long-term paths, let's say, fit into this. And this is something that we need to do indeed, let's say, very much together. We should not have, let's say, a fairly inefficient situation where, let's say, banks are, let's say, discussing a certain path different from what insurers, and then again different from what investors, let's say, are doing. But here I believe the convergence is already underway. This is what Renaud already described. Under GFANZ, we are doing exactly this sector pathway work. Now we have 3, yes. Let's say we need more, quite clearly, but this is to come. And in GFANZ, all of us, let's say, are represented, plus even more alliances. And that's a very good basis.
I would just add on that point, Günther, that Renaud, please go.
No, but I just wanted to add to that, and thank you very much, Günther, for laying that out very clearly, that indeed, I think each alliance has its purpose, but we have bridges from one to another. And just to give you a very concrete example, in the text of commitments that all the Net Zero Insurance Alliance members sign up to, there's actually a commitment that each company will aim to transition its investment portfolio to net zero greenhouse gases emission by 2050, and consider joining relevant initiatives. And we actually mentioned explicitly the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance in that section of the statement of commitment. And obviously, as you would expect, AXA is not only the chair of the Net Zero Insurance Alliance, it's also a member of the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance, a member of the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative. So, I think the comprehensiveness of our business models is also reflected in the membership of all these alliances. And we want to build the cognitive consonance, which is to have consistency between what we do on the asset side and what we do on the liabilities side.
I think the only thing I would add to what both have said, which I agree with, is that we ultimately have to remember that we all exist because we provide services to our clients, and our clients are ultimately those players in the real economy. And if I'm going to a major oil and gas company and asking them a different set of slightly similar but slightly different questions for different data to the questions Günther's asking, to the question Renaud is asking, we're not actually helping move the situation forward. We're potentially adding additional confusion. And so I think it's incumbent on us to look at this from a client lens perspective. There will be differences in what we as a bank do versus what an insurer does, but actually we should be trying as far as possible to minimize those, because it's what is required to help the real economy players focus on what they really need to focus on, which is making the changes necessary, not just giving us lots more data. So reporting is critical. I'm not suggesting it's not, but I think we need to try and make that as easy for people as possible.
And of course, thank you, Tracy. Of course, we feel also it's our responsibility at UNEP FI, who are a little bit the connective tissue between at least these three alliances, to identify, any inconsistencies, any dissonances, and try to address them as quickly as possible. So far, across these three alliances, at least, there's a high degree of consistency. It's not a perfect degree of consistency, but it's a high degree of consistency in terms of what's the level of ambition. All three alliances consider eligible scenarios that are not only 1.5 but also low overshoot. That's not exclusive to only one of the alliances. This is a shared level of ambition throughout. Intermediate targets is really important, even though the timelines are slightly different. The AOA is the most ambitious in terms of timelines, with intermediate targets due already by 2025, and also metrics. We're trying to establish the same metrics across the alliances, so, portfolio level metrics, but also sector specific intensity metrics, and the list goes on. So we're really trying to create that coherence and that avoid the dissonance. If at any given point we're failing to do so, I would invite the three of you and the wider community to tell us that things are not becoming consistent. We need to wrap up in a few minutes. I do want to thank the three of you for your time today, for also you and your teams, playing such an important role in these alliances as the chairing organizations. But I also would like to thank all of your other peers who are in these alliances, in these broad alliances. It's now along the UNEP facilitated alliances, there are now 150 financial institutions involved, working hand in hand, developing the target setting protocols, developing the positions, developing the reporting frameworks, etc. And I would like to use this opportunity to thank them all. Final question to all of you: what's your Christmas wish? If you had one to say, well, that's one thing, either from governments, from COP, from my portfolio companies, from the scientific community. It could also be two wishes. We don't want to be, you can have two Christmas wishes or so. What would that be? What would be the one thing that you think would help this whole agenda move forward very expeditiously going forward? What would that be? Tracy, let's start with you again.
Thank you. I suppose the two Christmas wishes I would have would first of all be that we build on the momentum that's been created, and we don't allow everybody taking a breath and relaxing for Christmas to mean that we sort of forget about this. So let's keep pushing the agenda. The second thing I would ask for is a real focus on transition, and a real focus on transition from all of the stakeholders. So not just financial institutions and their clients, but governments, policymakers, regulators, and colleagues in the wider public as well. It would be very possible to damage transition and to lead straight to exclusion if you get the policy and regulatory framework wrong. And I think there has to be a really mature, intelligent discussion about that. So that would be my top of my list.
Thank you, Tracy. Günther?
Well, I would wish that those people who are, let's say, more wealthy than the other 50%, those people do understand that actually we need to reach net zero individual by individual. And they start to consider this and start to think, what can I do in this decisive decade already to really contribute to this? I could imagine this gives a good basis for, let's say, governments and policymakers to act even more aggressively. It was a Christmas wish, therefore that's mine.
A very, very valid one. At the end of the day, it's all people. Everyone is a consumer at the end of the day, and a saver, and a producer or creator. Renaud?
Remco, you know that we at AXA recently announced very ambitious commitments to fight against deforestation. So I think that it's a bit provoking that you ask for Christmas present, because it reminds us of Christmas trees. So I hope we can keep an ecological pattern here. My one wish for a gift would be that there's a broader recognition that we need global solutions, because we are all in that together. So it will take action, you know, from each and every country throughout the world. We cannot act in isolation. And so the very tangible gift that I would hope that would come out of that recognition is a breakthrough on carbon pricing, because I really believe that in the economy, only what is measured improves. And currently we have this hidden cost of carbon, this negative externality which is not priced. And so I do hope that either by well-performing and fair emission trading schemes, by carbon border adjustment mechanisms when these are appropriate, we can improve in truly reflecting the cost of carbon as it is used in our economy, in our society. And I think it would be a great step in the right direction. And I hope that we can be ready by Christmas, but that's most likely a wish.
Christmas 2022, perhaps. Thank you all. Thank you all for your participation today. We need to wrap up. I'm sure if we had a physical audience, you would be getting standing ovations for your leadership. And so those ovations are coming through in virtual form only. We wrap up. Thank you. And we look forward to working with all of you in the alliances more intensively even than this year in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Remco.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.